Mhm. Hey everyone, welcome. Happy Sunday to you. This is Larry Norris on the Restoring Our Roots podcast, which is the voice of the Decriminalize Nature movement. This podcast serves as a gathering space as we explore the wisdom of entheogenic plants and fungi and our sacred connection to nature. What a great time to do it. Each month, we'll be featuring visionaries, healers, and different advocates from across the planet working to decriminalize entheogens, sharing their wisdom, and helping to restore a balanced relationship with nature. I'm Larry Norris. I'm the co-founder of Decriminalize Nature and the national organizing director. I've helped teams across the U.S. pass policy related to entheogenic plants and fungi or psychedelic plants and mushrooms. And we're really lucky today to have Rachel on, who's been helping us create this wonderful podcast, Restoring Our Roots. And I'm really excited for this conversation. We've had so many great conversations, but never have they been recorded and never on a podcast format. So I'm really excited to be here and chat with you today, Rachel. Why don't you give us a little introduction of yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Oh my gosh, I totally almost forgot about the fact that I'd have to introduce myself. Okay, so I'd like to first say that I'm a multidimensional earth being. That's the way I like to preface all of like when I'm introducing myself, because I do owe entheogenic plants and fungi a lot to, I guess, a rediscovery of self. I was born out in the prairies, Winnipeg, Manitoba. I currently live in the big city of Toronto. I've been here for a while now, since like 2007 or 8. But I've worked in corporate for a very long time, but I've now been using all those tools to help us launch this fun podcast, because tools such as like live streaming or like webinars or things like that are all things that I've used in regards to like digital project management. So things like getting types of software off the ground from start to finish has been kind of my MO, and kind of being a conductor of sorts for different people, right? And so this idea of building something like an application for diabetes, which is what I worked a lot on here, and I worked for UHN at the hospital in diabetes. So type 1 and type 2, we had an application called BANT, which was named after Dr. Frederick Banting, who discovered insulin. And we made this application as basically for people with diabetes to manage their their blood sugar, right? And so it was this way of like integrating your health with technology, but in a way for patients to be empowered. But of course, this is before I had my own psychedelic experiences, and I was involved in like health and working with a lot of people who are in, like we're working in this world because you want to help people, but then it became very clear that, you know, it's not really about that. It's about grant money and funding, and not really about the patient, and a lot about who gets credit for what. And this concept of like, insulin, although Frederick Banting, when he discovered it, was supposed to be free, he didn't want to patent it. I think it ended up being patented anyways, and you have to pay for insulin. So people who like you require it to live, it's not actually available to you, even in a country like Canada that I'm in that has free health care, right? So this, the languaging of all that when it comes to healthcare and all of this stuff has been kind of my background, and it's what I first drew me to working with Decriminalize Nature in the first place, because of the care that you had with languaging and storytelling, which is like ultimately what the mushies told me in my first breakthrough experience, that like those who tell the stories rule the world. I think Terence McKenna has also said this as well, and Plato has also said that those who tell the stories rule society. And it's true, because who's telling the stories that you tell in your head? Is it you? Or have you been given stories that you maybe don't even have the full context for yet, right? And so just re-examining all of that, and just having a little bit more play with what we call things, what we name things, not to like be aware of our triggers and all that kind of stuff, has been something that I think Decriminalize Nature has, I think, very uniquely set itself apart. I'm in a big city, Toronto. There's a big psychedelic renaissance happening right now. There's microdosing everywhere. I literally have mushroom stores selling like mushroom chocolates and all this stuff. But the sacred context that I think is required around a lot of these magical tools, I'm going to call them that, is missing. And it's tough, right? Because there's so much work to be done when it comes to groundwork, because there are elders out in the communities who have been using these in sacred ceremonies that have been threatened by the same institutions that now seek to legalize it or corporatize it. So it's just been unpacking all of that. How do you come at such a huge beast? I'm not going to call it a beast, actually. It's actually, I would say, like a construct that has been built on top of just, it's an old system that's going away, and we are in the midst of a beautiful new revolution of how everything is going to like be in the future for our children who are going to be born in this age of Aquarius generation, where everyone's just going to be a lot more aware. People are not going to be taken by as many lies, but at the same time, we have things like AI, and tech has risen to this level that people's discerning skills have to come up, also level up. So I think that's enough for an intro. Let's
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And there's so many, I mean, you touched on so many
go.
elements there that I think as we sort of move forward, we'll want to sort of tap into because there's a lot there. And I think, you're speaking to what's underlying a lot of this movement, what's underlying a lot of this sort of revolution of consciousness, as you were mentioning earlier, or this shift into a new paradigm or shift into a new, I guess, astrological space, or however you want to call that, this planetary alignment, or
Yeah,
how would you call
yeah.
that? Would you call it an
The new
astrological
cosmic age,
the new
or
cosmic age? Sure,
yeah,
sure. Yeah. I mean, what's going on there, and you see things happening that really sort of reflect a lot of people are having much deeper thoughts now around these bigger questions. And I think that's what we're trying to tap into. And if we can help guide some of the narrative away from the more controlled gatekeeping approach to these medicines, then perhaps we'll be able to, help more people connect with this higher self, this consciousness, this
yeah,
this space beyond, if you will.
yeah,
Yeah, so this is great. So you grew up, you said, in Winnipeg, kind of
yeah.
prairie land out there. What was kind of the sense of psychedelics or entheogens there, and
Oh
and,
my
and
gosh,
did it shift,
I
and
had
how
the
did you come across?
oh my gosh, I had the worst magic mushroom trip when I was in my teens out in the prairies, but with a bunch of girls that I'm pretty sure I didn't like very much, and they didn't it's that's the set and setting thing, right? Of what you were
Mhm.
talking about. But yeah, like the prairies. When you were saying that, like what the vibe of what psychedelics are out in the prairies. Where did you grow up again, Larry?
I grew up in Michigan, outside Detroit.
Okay, so I feel like there's a vibe like out in like I guess like the west, you want to call it, if you have like space where there's like warehouses or things like where kids can just go out and like experiment, because I was born in the 80s, so um my generation kind of straddles the, you know, when things got really tech and people didn't like leave their houses and like, whereas like Winnipeg, of course, it was cold and stuff, but we did have a wonderful summer. And so this whole concept of like being able to just go out to a park and hang out with your friends and experiment with like whatever was kind of a thing. And uh, partying with your friends at different houses and like experimenting with like magic mushies. It was not, of course, done in like any kind of like sacred context. And I had like an experience where like the garden gnomes were talking to me and were telling me like, those girls hate you, they're talking about you. I'm like, what?
Yeah,
What is
yeah.
happening here? And I'm like, I'm never doing this ever again. And like that stayed with me for a while, because I was deathly afraid of magic mushrooms for a long, long time because of um, or actually all psychedelics. I'll say that I had a little bit of a prejudice against it because I went to an all girls Catholic school as well. So like
Mhm.
I was just like, drugs are bad. You can't. But at the same time, like you'd you'd also you'd have like this facade of like, I'm like this good Catholic schoolgirl, but on the side like you're partying and doing this other stuff. But at the same time, psychedelics are almost like brought up too many questions about
Mhm.
everything, and it just was like uncomfortable. And so I grew to be very fearful of them. And then until, of course, like I met my husband, and he had a very close relationship, I would say, with psychedelics and that world. I do think that certain people are born like with resonance for psychedelics. Like I tell him that I feel that males, like in terms of like psychedelics needing a vision quest, I feel like men are drawn to it in terms of like trying to like discover what their soul mission. But I shouldn't say that just men, but women have like, menstrual cycles and all these other kind of like rites of passage that happen whether or not you want them or not. But men don't have not necessarily built in. And so this need to kind of like have that time away into the subconscious realm, which is also, if we look at things symbolically, the subconscious realm is known as like your feminine aspect. If we're both
Mhm.
like male and female aspects, the receptive, subconscious, wild aspect was like, even though I'm in a female body, was like a scary one to look at. So it's been like a journey of like being like, oh, this way of like using magic mushies as like a party thing, and it seeding a lot of like anxiety to
Mhm.
being is one that's used in sacred practice as a way to anchor in creativity.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, and I think also it seems like there's two dynamics that are kind of playing out for you there. You're having the sort of religious
Yeah.
challenge, which was also about
Yeah.
sacred, but in a different, it kind of like puts you in a different direction. And then you have the party approach, which is not the sacred that maybe you were looking for initially. And I say that a lot with folks around integration is even with good friends, you're like, oh, why do you need integration? Can't you talk to your friends about it? Well, for some friends,
Yeah.
like, you can only talk about the party aspect, right? Oh, I melted my face off, or oh, I danced all night, or blah blah blah. But if as soon as you say, oh, I healed, or I
Yeah.
connected with the divine, or
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah. You're
you
getting into
understand
stuff.
this Buddhist nature or whatever. They're like, whoa, this is weird. I don't know about this. Don't talk about that stuff, right?
It's so
So kind
crazy
of
how that becomes like that. That's the weird thing, right?
right,
Not the
right,
fact that
right.
like gnomes were talking to me.
Right. Right. Yeah. So it creates isolation, right? And then all of a sudden you're sort of stuck with like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. And so I think that's where helps building community is really helpful because you come across someone like your husband who's done it in a different way. Same thing for me in my initial journeys, came across somebody who knew, go
Yeah.
inward, close your eyes, have the space to like explore your inner worlds.
Yeah.
And that shifts everything because all of a sudden
Yeah.
you're like, wow, there's so much possibility there, right? So
Yeah.
so take me through that. So now you're like kind of like, I don't know about this psychedelic thing. You meet someone, okay, this is interesting. There's another
Yeah.
option. What was that
Yeah.
first? What was, I guess, the first breakthrough where you're like, oh, wait, okay, there is something more here about that.
Yeah, it's I always forget about this part of my life, but like I competed in fitness for a very long time. Like fitness and like bodybuilding competitions. That's like actually how
Okay.
myself and my husband actually first met. We were both personal trainers at a gym, like downtown Toronto. And so like this I actually, when he was into psychedelics, I was really like, that's cool. You can do that. I'm going to be accepting of it, but it's like not for me kind of
Mhm.
situation. So um, as time went, like we got married and we like did fitness together and all that kind of stuff happened. And I will say this about like uh, building a relationship with someone, right? Like because we've been together a long time. We're gonna have like our 10-year wedding anniversary next year. Yeah,
Congratulations.
thank you. Like it's such a crazy thing for me because like I've always wanted to be in a relationship. That's always something that like it's my happy place. But I'm happy being single too. But I do find that there's a lot of my girlfriends. The thing about psychedelics too is that you realize like you're so not alone. You are everything, right? You are like there's like so much love in the universe, and like it's such a beautiful thing, and there's so much healing to be had by that. And I think sometimes people, if they are in a relationship with someone and they're growing, right, that other person can have, it's like a hard time for them to accept that growth if they themselves are not interested in it, let's say. And so myself and my husband actually ended up in like these huge fights, right? Because I he was speaking a language in psychedelic world like I didn't understand what he was talking about, right? And it actually triggered a lot of my religious programming.
Mm.
Right? I was like, this is like is this demonic? Or like what is who are you, like what entities are you talking to here? Like, and so like I didn't have my own experiences. I was very like divorced from my own dream worlds and my own imagination because I was in the corporate world. I was competing in fitness. Everything was so like material realm
Mm.
stuff, right? And um, I forget what it ended up happening that caused me to actually end up having a breakthrough experience. But I will say it's because I loved my husband and I trusted him that I had my foray into psychedelics and learned to realize what they truly are, despite all of this stigma that surrounds them and a lot of this negative storylines that exist around them, right? And even my own, right? Because uh, I had very limited experience with magic mushrooms, and yet I was going around being like, well, they're scary and they're not for me, and all this based on this very isolated one bad trip experience, right, that I had when I was like 15 years old. So it's kind of like learning to kind of work on all of that in myself even before having the breakthrough experience was a lot of uh, reprogramming, realignment, all of this stuff, which I realize now, talking to friends of mine who, want to take mushies is almost like a way to like magically fix things. Like, oh, if I take magic mushies, I'll be like Rachel, and like I'll also like be a dancer and find my like true love and all. I'm like, it doesn't really work. like I wish, but like,
Right.
but at the same time though, it's you just have to know yourself, and for each individual person, you're just going to have, like, I really do think that each of these, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be cannabis, it can be LSD, it can be coffee, it can be tobacco, it's whatever you're working with. It's everything has like a Manitou, and it's funny because I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, and the natives have this word called Manitou, and how like it's kind of like the force. It's in everything. Everything in reality has a Manitou, and it's you being a creator being. Whatever you have in your life story, you endow it with Manitou as well. And so realizing that when you are taking that sacred plant or mushroom, it's also being endowed with you.
Mm.
So like what you get in your trip or experience or journey is, while you can share that with others, is that there's a very unique intel symbol. Is There's some stuff in there that's up to you to kind of decipher, and the best way to decipher it is through things like movies, poems, art, songs. Everything artistic is all stuff pulled down from that etheric realm. And so all the stuff you find resonance in, I found, like, once you come back from that magic realm of the other world and you're in back 3D realm, it those symbolisms, like, they make a little bit more sense when you kind of interface them with, like, oh, uh, a book I really love, it has this character in it, and that kind of matches a certain character in me. And
Mm.
because of that, I now know that perhaps my path is maybe this when I'm struggling with something.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Is there anything in particular you can think of that um, you've had sort of insights or archetypes or symbols that you weren't familiar with, and then you research them afterwards, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, this actually lines up perfect. I mean, it sounds like you're pretty. I mean, maybe in the corporate world not so much, but now it seems like you're pretty well versed with symbolic stuff and all these other types of ways of looking at the world, archetypes and things. Have you come across that where all of a sudden you were
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
surprised
yeah.
by what comes up? Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, I my degree in university was English literature and psychology, which, like, an employment degree, sure, but it taught me a lot about, because English literature is all about like learning how to analyze literature, right? And using things like the classics, which is like mythology, and all of these stories from not just a level of like, okay, like Eros and Psyche, but like what do those entities represent on a higher realm, and then how do they interact with each other? So it's so funny because the corporate world, writing emails and like the way I wrote and the right way I spoke was so different than when I finally came out of it and like deprogrammed myself, because um, everything in corporate is so like jargon and like bullet point, and when you're trying to explain ineffable concepts, it just, you can't, like, I feel like what has come out most for me in the whole breakthrough experience is that communication, like how we tell our stories, is more than just the words that we use, although words and language are super important. Everything from like how you intonate, how we're doing this podcast right now, there's a video element, and we're having how we present it, all of that matters. Like, when I was at St. Mary's Academy, my high school that I went to, a big wonderful thing that I was like blessed with was that we had a really wonderful theater program. So and I was in drama, and you got to learn everything about what it took to put on a theater show. So how to light it, backstage, front stage, what's meant to be backstage. And I feel like that's the cool thing about psychedelics. You get to see backstage, right? You get to see like things from like this eagle eye view, or like from the creator perspective of like knowing what the script and how all that's going to happen. But there's this beautiful scene in it's not a beautiful scene. It's a fun scene in Watchmen. Have you seen any like so there's like go everyone watch Watchmen on Netflix. It's animated, but it's done like almost true to the comic book by Alan Moore. And there's a scene because Dr. Manhattan in this comic book, he sees time like it's not linear. It's always happening. He's like, it's 1985, it's 2000. It's this. People are like, where in time are you, Dr. Manhattan? He's just like, oh, like, so in it, he takes his lover Lori to Mars, and he's like, here, you're gonna tell me that you're sleeping with Night Owl, and she's like, okay, and so they continue to have a conversation, and then she tells him that she's sleeping with Night Owl, and he's like, oh my gosh, you're cheating on me, I'll surprise. And she's like, I don't understand how you can be surprised by anything when you already know everything that's going to happen.
Mhm.
And but that's the point, right? Like even though you know the outcome, it's not fatalistic. It's just you're the needle on the record, and like, oh, this is just like where I am in the story for now.
Mhm.
And yeah, so like so archetypes and all of these kind of ways of talking about things symbolically, or like songs, or talking about music, they're all different ways of how we can kind of like, I'm going to convey what I saw in my inner world to you. And so us with all our different pieces of the map can have a bigger map of what that etheric realm looks like. So maybe each time we can do more in that world, and like maybe anchor that into this world a little more.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I really love the idea, the concept of bringing things back, and I think that's
Yeah.
what we talk a lot about with integration or implementation. Talk to a couple other folks out there who talk about art pieces or symbols, or even McClindy would often talk about how the djembe drum was seen within a
Yeah.
tree, and then that was carved out of the tree. So even musical instruments or other things that we see and maybe take for granted for maybe come from these altered states of consciousness
Yeah.
where people are exploring and saying, "Oh wow, this is unique or interesting, and something that I should be sharing with humanity," so to speak. That's really fascinating. What are there any kind of unique things that you brought forward, and also, and I sort of aside, this is to extend the question even further, make it more complex here.
Yeah.
A lot of people talk about how, whether it's comic books or mythos or lore or ancient stories or your own psychedelic or entheogenic experiences, there are like, for folks, obviously, probably most people know what an archetype is, but these thematic
Yes.
sort of
Yeah.
personalities, if you will.
Yeah.
What kind of things are you seeing, both within the context of the books you're reading, plus also your experiences, plus also astrology going on and everything that's
Oh.
happening in the world right now? Do you see any kind of relevant archetypes? And then are any of these part of that you're bringing back to this realm to help share with the world?
Oh, yeah, that's a big loaded question, and I'm happy you asked. I do think a big message on like the first. So I loved Sailor Moon growing up. I was like a big anime person. I loved Sailor Moon. What were the big ones? Like Power Rangers, Sailor Moon. There was another one that was like a big thing where like me and my friends would always play on the playground. So this concept of like having powers, what
Mm,
does that mean in real life, right? So like if you were to say like I have telepathy, or if I have clairvoyance, or I can lift up small objects with my mind, like what does it mean to do magic? And one of my trips, like it's like I had this big understanding of like, oh, like that's what high magic is. I understand, like it's not about imposing your will on the world. It's more about aligning your will to the will of the universe. And because you are the universe, you're always going to act naturally in the, it's not like right way, right? Because it's like when you freestyle a dance, or you're like in flow state, or you're like in the moment and you're doing things. You're not consciously thinking anything. Things are just happening, and you're somewhere else watching it. So all of that can be practiced and harnessed, right? So just being a personal trainer and working with my body on a very extreme level, right? Where you have to get ready for a stage in like 12 weeks and you have like such utter control over things like that. There is a tell in every fictional story, just like Dune, just like Superman, in any of these. There's always a tell. And I tell people, like, pay attention to the characters that you find as your favorite, as like you find resonance with, because there are infinite amount of stories out there, and even in, like, there's in comic books multiverses upon multiverses, right? So the ones that you have your favorites of, like, no one tells you what your favorite flavor of ice cream is, right? So, or what your favorite movie is, and that can change. And so all of that is just for you to pay attention to and be aware that that matters. Like, it really, like, it there's we live in such a world where, like, who cares? Like, I care.
Mhm.
I tell
Mhm.
people, like, you, like, I care that, like, like who your favorite Power Ranger is. I care who, like, your favorite Ninja Turtle is, and that that actually tells me something about you.
Mhm.
And because I know that about you, then maybe I recognize you from another life when we used to play. Like, so all, and that's why, like, when you meet certain people, like, it feels like you can talk forever, because whether or not you subscribe to past lives or not, it's just a matter of, like, um, we have done this before
Mhm.
many, many times. And this is, every time is an opportunity to create a new possibility and to create a new path. And we get very stuck in old ways and old patterns, even though, like, they're not really good for us, or they're not serving our greater, grander purpose in this world. But what I've been told is that the message I need to get out to the world is that uh, we are in the time of superheroes. We are in the dream that our ancestors dreamed, and we are also in a point where our ancestors are waiting for us to dream them into life. So
Mhm.
there's a lot at stake, but we've got this. But we just need to also get out of our own way and um, be brave, have courage, realize that Mother Earth, the cosmic opera that surrounds us and supports us, will have your back if you are in your right heart and you are doing exactly what it is that you're meant to be doing. The, the tricky part is deciphering what that is, because there's a lot of noise. And to follow your heart is not the easiest path. So it's one of those things where to strike a balance between protecting your heart and then also seeking out the others who can help support and believe you, right? Because even, like, powers, like I say, like, if you were meant to levitate a small object off the ground, let's say, like, your power is levitation, um and then you're like, oh, wait a minute, I just want to, like, set stuff on fire, and that's not your power. Like, if you spend all your time practicing something that's not meant for you to do, you're gonna get very frustrated. Versus, like, if you are meant to be, like, walk through walls, or, like, time travel, there's so many. If you learning about superheroes, I'm like, wow, there's literally so many different powers. And if you look at the X-Men, each X-Men is completely different based on their genetic code, how they express their powers. Everything from healing factor to being able to have a diamond shield to being able to, like, break things down to molecular level and back again. So all of these things have been kind of, like, worked out in the imagination realm of these comic books. If we are able to synthesize that in that world, there is a way to have that express in real life. It just takes longer. It just takes practice. It just takes time. And we can do it. We just need to stop it with the distractions and, like, focus. Just like when I got ready for fitness competitions, you can do anything. Like, get ready for, like, a show and have, like, a six-pack of abs, or, like, in 12 weeks. Like, it's all possible. Like, your body will listen to you. It just takes time.
Yeah, such an interesting idea about what like things that seem beyond us, like powers or other things like
Yeah.
that, and how we're still drawn to one or the other, or one character or the other. And you look at sort of the archetypes and sort of the characters, and you look at like mythos, and there's this whole idea of archetypal mythology. I had a teacher once that would say that and he's actually had a couple of very interesting examples of like that each of us, we just have to find who our character is, but each of
Yeah.
us are here representing that story.
Yes.
Now, it is a creates a little bit of a fatalistic sense, which are all of a sudden it's like, okay, are not fatalistic but deterministic, where it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is what I'm going to do, and this is all I have to do. But you, like you're saying earlier, there is some flexibility there, but that you can sort of tap into that story and learn lessons from it. And he showed experiences where, a person that had this particular archetype, went through same life stories, met with the same people with the same names, went met
Wow.
with the same sort of, big sort of hero's journey type experiences, all these different types of things kind of mapped out. And it's kind of strange to see, like, wow, okay, so how much are we in relationship with the greater things out there, the forces, the beings, the spirits of nature, the sort of connections to something grander, and how are we playing out that storyline, and are we active in it, or are we sort of engaged with it, or are we more sort of receptive to it? Even like he talks also about this idea of the terror psychology, which is like that we're here to every city like Toronto
Mm.
brings the people there that are representing Toronto's archetype, not necessarily your
Oh,
archetype, but Toronto
yeah.
itself needs to be seen. And so the way it's going to be seen is bringing people together. Same here in the Bay Area, it brings the type of people together, and it has this sort of estuary feeling. It's a bay where a lot of different communities are coming together. And so
Yeah.
that's kind of really
Yeah.
what's kind of being represented. And so it's just a fascinating way to look at even space, because it brings us back to really appreciating nature and
Yes.
appreciating the environment and the place we're in, and really saying, like, how is this place speaking? And some people might say, oh, that's way out there, but like, how is that place speaking? What does it harm us to ask that question?
Oh,
What does it hurt to say, like, how can I become better engaged with the environment around me, the people around me, the communities, et cetera, et cetera? And so I think that's something that I've really been able to tap into a little bit more with entheogenic experiences, going to these different places too, and
mm.
seeing that the inner entities or beings or spirits change in these different places. Why is that?
Do you
What's
find
going
that
on?
like when you go to different places, like even though you haven't been there before, you have like a memory of it?
In the inner journey, or when I go to the place and
Like
didn't
let's say
do
when you go in the place in like real life, like physically, and like let's say like deja vu experiences.
mm-hmm.
Do you find that like
Yeah.
you have that like where it's like, oh, I've been here before, but you haven't been here there before, but you have been there before?
Yeah, I mean that's happened occasionally with external places, but I think what's from like someone that's really interested in studying the inner experiences, the sense of familiarity,
Yeah.
so fascinating. It comes up over and over and over again. I went to this weird place that was beyond the stars, and it felt like I'd always been there, that it was my home, that this is something I've always known, and I've never been there before. So that comes up so much in these experiments. What is that? Even if it's just a feeling,
Yeah. No.
where's that feeling
Yeah.
coming
Yeah.
from?
Yeah.
Where's
Like
that
it's
where's that familiarity coming from? Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. Oh my gosh, it's so funny you say that because there's a oh my gosh, my Promethea comic book. There's this scene at the end of the world where Promethea talks to you, the comic book reader, and says, "It's always been just you and me in this room and this fire the whole time. You've been telling me a story. Don't you remember?" It's just like it's such a
Mhm.
trippy thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just it's and it's that whole concept of like, oh, like we're playing, we're just infinite beings, and we're here, we're playing as like Rachel and Larry having this conversation about like super cosmic things, but like it's about like the universe informing itself because like yes, we put a lot of stock and um, wonder and awe, and it's deserved to the upper higher realms, but this material realm is also very important because um, there's something about symbolically having something here intangible that represents that everything else because it like it's an Ouroboros and it feeds back onto itself, right? Like no different than how Star Wars as like a movie has inspired a whole bunch of what people's concept of what space even is. So all of these
Mhm.
sci-fi things, their creation and like even though it's very tangible here as like a movie, is also informing people's imaginations too, right? So
Mhm.
it's also something to keep in mind for people, I think, as well, in terms of like psychic well being, as well, that to be aware of like what stories you let into, like what you, like you, sovereign being, choose what stories you allow into your personal mythos. Because to your point about like all the different archetypes, and there's if there's anything I've learned about Greek and Roman myth is that there's multiple versions of the same story,
Mhm. Right.
and like all are true. right?
Hmm.
So how does that work?
Hmm.
So in terms of your story too, it's multiple versions of that same archetype in terms of how that story can go, right? And so you do have that ability to, even the universe loves surprises, to take things in a totally different way that informs everyone about like, hey, never thought it could be done that way.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's where, and I think when we started this conversation around this podcast today, it was like wanting to tap a little bit into languaging and things like that too. And it's kind of what you're tapping into here is that, you have these experiences, you want to bring them back.
Yeah.
How do you capture the ineffable? How do you share it with people? And then how do you make sure you language it in such a way that it doesn't get sort of bogged down or homogenized by, I came up with this, I'm going to coin this term today publicly.
Oh,
Uh,
oh, do it.
it's status quosis, which is status
Ah.
quo psychosis, status quo
Ooh, that's good. I like that.
mentality. Like you can't get like the Agent Smith of the Matrix, like you say something against the system, then somebody pops up and boom, status quo happens, and all of a sudden they're
You can't do
defending
that.
defending the system,
Yeah.
defending the primary language that they're familiar with, not this new language that makes them think differently, that allows them to, be a little more critical about what it is, the narratives that they've been given, because again, the narrative is shaping how they see the world, how they see their
Yeah,
paradigm, how they engage with it, how they
totally.
practice with it, right? So to get everyone out of status quo, I think that's what
Oh my gosh,
psychedelics
that's really
can do. Can really kind of shake it up, and then you're also you're open to new ideas and new languaging because you have now these concepts that you can't put words to. The
yeah.
system of language we have is just it's not prepared to respond to these big experiences. So maybe let's talk a little bit. I know you have some marketing background as well. Like talk a little bit about language and shaping
Oh
and
my gosh.
crafting sort of reality, and then how we connect to our entheogenic experiences with that.
Well, you know what? Language is an interesting thing too, because my father was is a retired now professor in computer science, right? So you think like code, right? Computer code, and how you if then statements, and how like all that is, that's how computers work, and like zeros and ones in terms of like there's communication, and then there's like the whole concept of like language, and the fact that like when you're saying something there's a frequency in that as well. So all these multi oh, and even acronyms as well, right? So if you have like you know NASA, and then like what those each of those like letters represent, or like IBM, and then what each of those represent. And so being in the corporate world, the amount of like acronyms that there were was insane. So you actually have like a word that it's basically computer speak, if I think about it, too many acronyms, as well as just jargon, and even things like Twitter, where you had like, I know that I think you can talk longer now on Twitter, but everything about how like we communicated started to really change rapidly when the internet started to be involved with like everything from like emails, how you write subject lines, how you like write so that your things are viral, things like hashtags, keywords, all of this stuff. That is not exactly how human beings communicate
Mm-hmm.
in like
Mm-hmm.
regular like. And if you want to tell a story and you're going to give me hashtag, that's like a terrible way to tell a story kind of thing. So uh a big thing that my one of my first breakthrough experiences showed me was the fact that I wrote a book when I was 14 years old. And so when I was 14, I was in grade 8, going from grade 8 to grade 9. And so that was like the transition from like, junior high to high school. So I was going to like St. Mary's Academy, and like my friends were all going to be separated. So I wrote a story about me and my friends discovering that we were like ancient warrior archetypes from Atlantis, and we were called to like save Mount Olympus from this evil queen that was taking over all the myths and making all of them like bad stories,
Mm-hmm.
taking over like happily ever after, and like no more. It's all like evil stuff, and like usurping Zeus and throwing over the cosmic order of things. So this great dragon tells us like, you guys have to go up to Mount Olympus and like restore order. So I wrote this whole story. I wrote it on like my Macintosh too, because my dad I have it on a floppy disk backed up and everything. I printed it out. My sister actually did it as a book report when she was in grade 5 at the time, and I have like this letter from my teacher basically saying like, you should write young adult novels. this kind of stuff. So like I went back, I forgot about this book. This book was like forgotten about when I didn't was in the corporate world. But when I had received this message when I went into that state, was just like, oh, Rachel, do you remember that you wrote a book and there's a whole universe and story that's waiting for you to finish it? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, it's very important that you finish it. Like, is it? It's like, it's very important that you figure certain things out in the story. I'm like, okay, I get it. So I got my story and I rewrote it, and I've basically like, oh, I get it. Because when you learn in the book about what it means to transform, you figure it out in imagination realm, and that is like the first step to figuring it out in real life, because all of the characters in all of my stories are based on real people. They're all people that like friends of mine, people I know, people that like it's the way that I see them. And so and based in astrology as well, right? So my girlfriends of mine who are like Cancerian in nature, they have like water powers, and they're very empathetic, and they need to like recharge under waterfalls if they like exhaust their powers too much, right?
Mhm.
I have another friend who like she's really good with words and a really Gemini. She has a quill that she can like write spells in the air, and that's how you like shoot your powers. But it's been so fun with my friends to be like, hey, I'm putting you in my book. It's based on your astrology. Tell me what your powers are, and for them to go into that world, and then we meet there, and then we actually really see each other. And it's been such a trip for me, like recently, like reconnecting with friends of mine that I'd lost touch with, moving here to Toronto from Winnipeg, and like my 14-year-old friends, like that I wrote the initial book with, like I've like now reconnected with, and like during Christmas I'm actually gonna get to see them in real life again. And so it's
Great.
I'm so like tripped out with like how all that's kind of working out. And like Larry, I want you in my book too as well. So it's like this, I can't explain how things work the way they work, or why I was like trapped in the corporate world for the 10 years I was trapped in. But timing is timing, and stories will come to surface when they are meant to. And that whole breakthrough experience about like rediscovering my writing at 14 has been a trip as well, because like I had to of course rewrite it, and then jokes at 14 are not the same.
Right.
They just like some things I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. And then a lot of assumptions I made in the story too, where it was just kind of like, I don't understand how we got from here to here. Like it just, and so I'm like, okay, I'll make a portal. So
Right.
it's, and so like in being in that creative writing frame of mind is such a different mind frame than writing an email, or writing a report, or writing a project plan, or any of those kind of like boring writing things. So like creative writing and being like, oh, I need to solve a plot thing. Like you're trying to work out how the story is actually supposed to work, and like writing it all through. And so relearning how to do that has been such a joy, to rediscover that part of myself. And so I do encourage all artists out there to like maybe like take a look at entheogens as like a way to kind of like reach out into that ether, and like because you have such a beautiful, perfect, like your own unique lens as to how you would interpret it. And that's the beauty of art, that no two people are going to see it the same way, and that's the point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think right now, especially, it's there's so much being asked for original, authentic, soulful art, especially with AI taking
Oh
all the other
yeah,
stuff there.
yeah.
But
AI is only good for like nightmare fuel material for certain
yeah, right.
things.
But here we are. We're sitting in a place where these narratives and these stories and these advertisements and everything else are getting pushed on us, whether we like it or not.
That's true.
Have you learned any techniques in your entheogen, or understood languaging in a different way through your entheogenic experiences that when you come back, you can kind of feel like, how do you navigate the bombardment of stories to
Ooh.
really being sort of on your core story and knowing where your path is? There's infinite amount of, like, I like how you're saying that earlier, that there's infinite amounts of paths and only really one. You only it's free choice, but there's only one right path. you can choose anything, but
Yeah.
really, if you want everything to happen right, you got to go along this particular way
Yeah.
where coincidences and synchronicities and all this other kind of stuff come up. But these stories, these narratives are trying to get you off that path to buy this product or do this thing or support this or that or da 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 da. So, what is your process around navigation? What tips and tricks did you use to kind of navigate the language world out there as we see it, and maybe somewhat even a propaganda kind of way?
Oh, that's a great. You know what? We should get a girl I know, Danny Cass. She talks about like propaganda and everything, and like how you can kind of like
Mm-hmm.
discern it. But great question, because it's crazy right now in terms of just how many distractions are out there to pull you off your soul mission. And I say all the time that like when I was working in corporate, like I had dreams that weren't mine at that point, like the next promotion or like the next project or like the next deadline were always like the main focus of anything, and that's not really serving the universe, I don't really think so. It was kind of like just discerning all that. And I think the biggest tip I have for everybody is that despite all the social media, despite all of everything, just to carve out time to just be alone. And
Mm-hmm.
whether or not that is with entheogens to start or not, just to have time to just talk to yourself, to journal, listen to just like music you want to listen to, but just like it can be like 30 minutes, but like schedule it with yourself and just go there into your creative space and like ask your inner child certain questions and just see what comes back. And
Find your
uh,
center. Yeah.
just find it, just like reground, like that can be done in a lot of different ways, right? Like if you have like trees around you that you can go out to, or like a morning walk or anything. I hesitate to say meditation because I feel like that comes with it a lot of like loaded stuff with it, being like, well, I need to like or like or do this or like have my mind be quiet. I'm like, you're not forcing your mind to be quiet or any of that. It's just find a nice actual quiet spot that's away from like electromagnetic radiation, and which is tough, right? Because our
Mm-hmm.
homes are full of it. So, but just to try to find a little spot that even like for yourself, psychically, you can create these kinds of things too. And like this sounds woo, but even as simple as like having like salt, a salt circle around you, or like things that represent the elements, like a feather and like a crystal, a bowl of water, like the four elements around you in a circle, or just even like blessing the space around you, just to be like, okay, this is now a sacred space, this is a sacred time, this is for me, I'm going to, and just to say it out loud. And like even if it sounds like cheesy, like I've had to get used to that, just like what you say matters so much. And
Mm-hmm.
even more so like the fact you think it too, right? Like when I personal train people, I say like your body hears everything that your mind says, right? So if you're approaching everything and being like, oh, I'm so weak, I can never do this, I'm like awful, and like all this in your inner head, I'm like, yeah, you're the rest of your body's like, okay, well, I guess I am a piece of crap. So instead, like I try to be like, you got this, Rachel. Or I like to say, like, I like to invoke all the other Rachels and all the other multiverses. So I'm like, listen, this Rachel needs a little extra oomph right now. So could you please like lend me some? And it's weird too because I almost feel like I can feel myself in other realms, like when she needs me too, or like when your inner child needs you to like reach out through the multiverse and give her a hug and just be like, be gentle with yourself, with, let's say, like you mess up something or you make a mistake, and instead of like being like, oh my gosh, why do you always do that, just be like, it's okay, it's all
Mm-hmm.
right, it's fine, like I'll do better next time, I promise. But just like that, just to speak to yourself in a gentler way, where your inner mother is the one that is the mirror of the eternally compassionate mother, is one that allows for that inner spark to try new things, to like get up on stage, to like try the new idea, to like try the joke that like you don't know if it's gonna land, but to just have courage. And so I do think that like that's why I always end my comic book conversations with that. It does take true courage just to be exactly who you are.
Mm-hmm.
It really does. Everyone wants you to like fit in this box, fit in this, all that kind of stuff, and like just because you like this movie it means this, just because you like that music it's this. It's like for dance for me, like I can't say I dance one style. I dance many styles, but I do have girlfriends of mine who are samba dancers, or you're very specifically a hip hop dancer, or you're very specifically a heels dancer. Where I'm like, or you're just a dancer, and you dance to what the song asks of you, right? And so I think that if we just just have the courage to be you, love what you want to love, like what you want to like, and you can also change your mind when presented with new information.
Right. And I think that's the thing where people get so identified
Yeah, like it's so
with
like
their
I'm this
story.
and I'm always this, but like no, you can evolve. You know?
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think that's really a critical part, especially right now as so much is happening in the world. Paradigms are shattering and new ideas are coming forward. Things we never thought were possible are becoming possible. Things we
yeah,
hadn't even thought about before are happening. And I think if we too overly identify with an old story, it's going to be a difficult paradigm shift that we're going to be going through.
it's gonna
And again, I
hurt
think
a lot
we're
more.
sure. And I think again that's where entheogens can come into play is because you're able to sort of almost experience multiple storylines. I can't tell you how many times I've gone back to a difficult challenge in my life
Yeah.
through an entheogenic experience, and now I'm witnessing it from the other people's points of view. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm witnessing like, oh wow, okay, actually, there was something else going on that I didn't even consider in the first time. So it really opens up your idea to sort of shift your narrative to rewrite stories,
Yeah.
to reconsider things that maybe you hadn't considered before. And I think that's a really important tool, especially right now as we're seeing all these wonderful things flying around in all these places,
Yes.
and who knows what's going on, right? But
Yeah. It's
people, I went to a holiday party the other day, and that was like, I've never been to a holiday party where aliens were the first topic of conversation that everyone's talking about because there's all these things in the sky and people are having to shift in their
yeah.
perspective. Like, is this something we really should be considering and talking about right now? And this is not like your normal, quote unquote, woo, as you said, group of people. It was people that, have, you wouldn't really expect to be talking about it. So it's now kind of broken into the sort of the mainstream psyche, if you will, as
Mm-hmm.
this archetypal story, this what's going on, what's beyond. We're able to think about what's beyond us now in a different kind of way, which I think is really fascinating.
What do you think about aliens, Larry? What do you think?
Yeah, lots of interesting stories. That might
Yeah.
be for another, that might be for another podcast unless you want to go for another hour. But
Oh my
but
gosh, so true that. Yeah, we have
yeah,
actually, let me see, timing, we have 5 minutes
minutes.
left.
So
Yes.
we'll definitely keep that in mind for another question.
Yes.
If it ever comes up
Yeah.
in a future podcast, we'll chat about it, or maybe we'll just do another one just on that. But
Yeah,
I have
because
some,
the aliens question, like I don't know if I have really I struggle with that answer, actually.
yeah. I don't I For me, I think there's definitely something that's got to be out there. We're not the
Of
only out here,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I
And
mean,
and
it's
if
definitely
we
what not they. It's not what they say it is. That's
Sure.
yeah.
And I've had multiple entheogenic experiences where it was like they're like, you guys are wasting all your money trying to find us out there. We're right here. Just take some substances, take some entheogens, take some plants and mushrooms. We're here, we're waiting, we're ready to have a conversation. So again, is that an alien? Is it not? What is that exactly? I'm not sure. But
Yeah.
there's a sense of like there is more to this reality than just us. And
Yeah.
whether or not these ships that are whatever you're hearing about all the time now. I mean, LA, New York, New Jersey, like all over. I mean, I had friends in LA that have been talking about this, friends in San Francisco. They just saw
Oh,
some the other day. So, like in
interesting.
the last 2 weeks, there's been multiple people that have seen it in different places that have come to me and been like, "Hey, heard about this?" So, why is that happening right now? I don't know, but again, speaks to this very interesting point in time that we're in. But before we end, I do have one question I want to ask that's slightly different than this topic. So we'll
Yes.
table this one for a future time. So
Yes.
all the
The
listeners out
aliens.
there, you come find us in another episode when
Yes.
we talk about aliens
Yes.
or
For our
entities. Because
next guest,
yeah, right, we're gonna invite somebody down from one of the ships in
one of
New
the star
Jersey.
systems. Oh,
So the question we want to make sure that we ask everybody as they come on the podcast is really kind of relevant to what we're doing and why we're doing this podcast, which is really
mm-hmm.
not only talking about the benefits and potentials of these potential medicines, also some of the challenges that could come up, but also like how do we bring this story forward again, this narrative forward to help people change policy so they're not going to jail. So,
Yes.
question that we're asking everybody is when you hear the words decriminalize nature, what does that mean to you?
Oh, set Mother Nature free.
Set Mother Nature free.
Yeah, set her free. Let her go.
Yeah.
And it's up. It's up to us. She's asking us to. I have a poem actually. I'm trying to do like a spoken word of it. It's called The Warrior's Prayer. And when I hear decriminalize nature, it's just, like that warrior cry of just like, let her go. It's just, she's been on such lockdown of people like having a claim and like all this stuff on the land. But it's really like no one owns her. This is us up for us to guard her and protect her, not for us to like own and like put other people in cages because they choose to have a relationship with her in a way that you don't quite
Mhm.
understand yet, so it's that 100%.
Yeah, amazing. That's awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. That's a great way to kind of end this all out. I really
Yeah.
appreciate the conversation. We always have fun. I
Mm-hmm.
really enjoy some more conversations in the future with you. Maybe we'll do even some elements. We didn't talk about something that we want to do in the future, though, which is also doing this sort of book club or book
Yes.
review kind of thing. Again, we're
Yes.
talking about language. Language is so important. I'd love to sit with you and maybe, or maybe some other guests as well, and just kind of go over chapters in books. A friend of mine was listening to the Michael Pollan book on audio the other day, and she had to keep pressing pause because I'd be like, well, there's this thing, oh, this thing. You notice he uses this word right here. That kind of shows his
I
mindset around
love that
more
so
regulatory
much.
model, blah blah blah. And so, like,
Yeah. Yeah,
how do we
because
even
like it's
parse
so like in
words?
all of those books it's like there's so much encoded, and
Yeah,
uh what you take from certain passages is different than what I'm going to take, and so in the conversation of that is like something new, and so it's just, yeah, there's a huge there there with that.
right,
So
right,
yeah,
absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, even if it's just examples, just get people interested in the rhythm of that, how that looks. So I don't know if there are any questions at all, but if there
let
isn't,
me just
maybe we
double
could.
check. Let's see here. Oh no, I just had, when are we going to be live next?
2 Sundays from now on the 22nd of December.
Yes.
If everything works out perfectly, we'll have another one of our board members from Decriminalize Nature, Kutsi Valadez or Angelica Valadez, who will be here talking about her approach to medicine work. Her family is Huiratica, so she's been doing a lot of work with peyote, the huichol
Nice.
down in Mexico for a long time. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And yeah, we're looking forward to a good holiday end of the year.
Yeah.
So thank you again, Rachel, for being here. Thank you for setting this up and keeping us on all the different platforms, and really excited to continue getting all our voices out here. So appreciate it. And until next time,
Until next
tune
time.
in, stay rooted, and let's grow together. I'm Larry Norris, and this is the Decriminalize Nature Restoring Our Roots podcast.